Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward.
And I'm Melissa Ridgen.
We begin tonight in Quebec City on the eve of the G7 summit. Leaders of countries with the largest economies in the world will meet for 2 days to discuss investments, jobs, climate, and energy.
There's more on the agenda. Nation to Nation host Todd Lamarand explains.
Thank you. Now, this summit is already being called the G6+1. It's already expected to be acrimonious, and that's due to one man, U.S. President Donald Trump. Trump, of course, has already pulled out of the Paris Climate Change Accord and out of the Iran nuclear deal. And he's slapped huge tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. In retaliation, Canada is slapping its own tariffs on a whole list of items, everything from chocolate to dishwashers to toilet paper, and a bunch of other things that are just too long to list. It's worth approximately $16.6 billion, and it's going to be come due on, of all days, Canada Day, July 1st. Now already, French President Emmanuel Macron and Prime Minister Trudeau are presenting a united front against Trump and telling Trump, you know, your tariff and your trade policy are going to backfire on you. Now, with all this spotlight on trade and tariffs, will Trudeau be able to push his own agenda, which centers around gender equality and centers around his reputation as a climate change leader? However, as anyone here in Canada knows, his reputation as a climate change leader is severely tarnished, especially after the government's purchase of a stake in the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion. Back to you.
Streets of Quebec City are expected to be full of protesters during the summit. In fact, they're already starting. Tom Fenario joins us now live from a march about to get underway.
Hi, I'm here at the Parc de Grave in Quebec City, which is on Huron-Wendat territory. As you can see, there's about a few hundred protesters who are gathered. They're ready to march at around 6 p.m. It wouldn't be a G7 summit without mass protests, and protesters here in the grand tradition of anti-colonialism, anti-globalization, I should say, activism, say there will be a diversity of tactics over the weekend. Many obviously will be partaking in peaceful marches such as this. There will be an element perhaps of civil disobedience, and as on occasion there may be destruction of private property. As it will be normal, Canada has put almost $400 million towards security here. Windows have been boarded up all over downtown, so Quebec is prepared for the worst. However, radical activists are not the only concern here. Police at the 2010 G20 summit were accused of physical abuse, excessive force, and civil liberties abuses. So Quebec, the province, has decided to put independent observers in place who will be watching all interactions between protesters and police. Forgive us, the march is just getting going here, lots of noise here. One of the more radical activist groups that says there will be a disruption tomorrow. However, facts have not been divulged as to what or where that will be. Meanwhile, Innu activists have just spoken. They have expressed extreme disappointment in the 3 Innu First Nations and the Huron-Wendat community, who said they will support the G7 and welcome the folks here. We'll be here until Sunday. Make sure to check our Twitter and our web for more up-to-date transpirings, and we'll have more here for you all weekend. Back to you, Winnipeg.
More reaction now after news that the National Inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls did not get the 2-year extension they were asking for. APTN's Tina House has this story from Vancouver.
Bernie Williams and Gladys Raddick are in downtown Vancouver at the Memorial Rock. It stands in memory of those that are lost or were killed. It's a place they've been to many times to honor the victims. But now they're mourning the news that the inquiry into the missing and murdered will only be getting a 6-month extension.
This is ground zero. What about the families that are not going to have that opportunity to give voice?
For over 40 years, activists Bernie Williams and Gladys Raddick have been fighting for justice for missing and murdered women and girls. Their work has included co-founding the Walk for Justice, which included 7 walks in BC and across the country. Gladys's car even features missing person posters. Her own niece is also on display. Tamara Chipman, who is still missing from along the Highway of Tears.
There's a lot of things that are happening to our women today, and our women are still disappearing, our girls are still being murdered, and our men and boys are going missing and still being murdered, and nobody's doing a damn thing about it, and they want to pull the plug.
Radek feels that the Prime Minister of Canada is choosing a $4.5 billion pipeline over justice.
They want to sit there and worry about, $50.3 million for the inquiry, yet he wants to buy out Kinder Morgan? Come on, there's something wrong with this picture here. What happened to his consensus on wanting to help the First Nations people and have an open and honest relationship with us? Not going to work like this.
For Bernie, whose own mother and two sisters were killed on Vancouver's downtown east side, says this is a huge loss for everyone.
And this is what it's, come down to. What a slap in the face. I feel really, I'm not angry, I'm just saddened, because there's family members, again, they will never ever get that opportunity. And this is not right.
The final report on the inquiry into murdered and missing women is now to be completed by April of 2019. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
It's been 5 months since Gerald Stanley was acquitted in the death of Colten Boushie. But the fight for change in the justice system continues in Saskatchewan. Tamara Pimentel has more from Regina.
It's been 100 days of fighting for justice. And for 100 days, Prescott Demas has been a firekeeper of this camp set outside the Saskatchewan legislature in Regina.
I think just being here this long and, them not coming out, I guess it goes to show just, this is why we're here. This is the treatment that we get.
This camp was put up on February 28th, following the acquittal of Gerald Stanley. What started off as 2 tents and a sacred fire has turned into a community, gathering with the hope of speaking with government officials.
Them ignoring us this long and hoping that we get bored and go away, but I mean, like setting up the camp here and I guess just that commitment and hoping that we get that opportunity to be heard.
Rochelle Dubois lost her son Haven 3 years ago and is still fighting for an investigation to be done.
There are other cases out there. There are other Coltens, there are other Tinas, there are other Havens, and also the social services, all the children getting taken away from putting in foster homes. So here we've been helping, there's been a team of people who have been helping families go to court and with the legal process of getting their children back.
This week, the camp received its second eviction notice from the Provincial Capital Commission, stating the camp must be removed by June 5th. But it's going to take more than a notice to bring down this community.
Our family has grown. A lot of people come to hang out, chill, tell their stories. It is a gathering place of people from all walks of life.
Dubois and Demas say there are no plans to take the camp down. Even with Canada Day around the corner, they say they will be right here in the middle of the celebration, fighting for justice. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Regina.
There's been a new legal twist in the ongoing battle over a notorious residential school. That story is coming up after the break.
And we'll check back in on a community we profiled with moldy homes and no running water. But first, here's a look at tomorrow's weather forecast.
A high of 22 in Fredericton on Friday, a soggy 16 in Charlottetown, cloudy and 11 for Happy Valley, Goose Bay and Cartwright, snow in Inukjuak, 15 under cloudy skies in Sept-Îles and Chibougamau, sunny and 23 in Montreal, rain and 25 in Windsor, 25 minus the rain in London and Peterborough, sunny skies and 19 for Wawa and Thunder Bay. In northern Manitoba, 22 under the sun in Thompson and Norway House, rain and 24 in Dauphin, showers and 22 in Brandon. In Saskatchewan, 23 in Swift Current and North Battleford, rain and 20 in Yorkton, sunny and 22 in La Ronge, rain and 22 in Buffalo Narrows.
This time last year, we traveled to a remote community in the Decho region of Northwest Territories. We showed you people living in mold-infested homes without running water. Now we're back, and reporter Charlotte Moret-Jacobs finds out what, if anything, has changed.
How long have you been living without running water?
2011.
Gerald Stanley says he never thought he'd have to live like this, but he is not alone. He is one of many in the small First Nation communities of Wrigley living in deplorable conditions. In the 7 years he has lived here, the local housing authority has repaired a few things.
They fixed it, right? And then
What did they fix?
they got new doors, windows. No, new doors and what else? All new cupboards.
The community of 120 people is 3 hours away from the nearest town and has no grocery store. There is little work. Gerald has gone without electricity for over 2 years.
How does not having electricity inconvenience you?
Pretty dark. Got a flashlight. See? Or a gas lamp.
And as you can see here where the darker shade is, that's where the water leaks through, and it's leaking through the light bulb.
This time last year, APTN visited the community to do a story about mold-in homes. Some of those we spoke with have since vacated their homes because of health risks and were unable to do a follow-up interview. For Daryl, the solution is simple.
What needs to be done?
Fix our houses.
Do you think that the Minister of Housing or like some of the politicians in Yellowknife need to come out here and see what housing is like?
Yeah.
Inadequate housing goes back decades. In 1965, the village was relocated from the banks of the Mackenzie River to higher ground. The reason? They would be closer to an airport being built for a pipeline. Gerald says he's applied for funding through the local housing authority and now has to wait. On top of electricity and running water, he hopes he can acquire flooring to make up for the toxic smell from a fuel leak inside his home years ago.
Can you tell me actually about the fuel spill too, because that probably isn't safe. Like they probably like the fumes.
Well, I had to clean it up.
But like in the beginning that you still had to live here, and then there was a spill and like.
Yeah, it was all soaked, so that's why they all popped out.
Charlotte Moore-Jacobs, APTN National News, Wrigley.
Sit down, just...
There's a new twist in the St. Anne's residential school saga. The federal government is now seeking $25,000 in legal fees from the lawyer representing the survivors. It's a rare legal move. Our reporter Lucy Scully joins us from Ottawa to explain. Hi Lucy, thanks for joining us. Can you talk a bit about why the government is seeking these fees?
Well, Dennis, there's some speculation that this is a tactic to quell the advocacy work of lawyer Faye Brunning, who has been representing the survivors of St. Anne's Residential School for years. Now, just for some background, St. Anne's Residential School is one of Canada's most notorious residential schools. It was based in Northern Ontario in Fort Albany, and it was known for a homemade electric chair. As well, the school has been the subject of more than 60 lawsuits for the physical, sexual, and psychological abuse of the Indigenous children there. Some of the horrific evidence is outlined in thousands of pages stemming from a provincial police investigation. Now, Faye Brunning has been fighting for access to those documents. The survivors recently lost an appeal on the matter, but now they are at the point in the trial where both parties are discussing legal costs. And we just learned that the federal government is seeking $25,000 from Faye personally, which is an unusual move. And we caught up with her lawyer earlier today, and this is what he had to say about it.
I think it certainly could be seen as an attempt to try and curb the enthusiasm of her advocacy. It could be seen as a way of trying to intimidate her, trying to deter her from continuing to represent vigorously the St. Anne survivors.
And so, Lucy, what does the federal government have to say about this?
Well, we've reached out to federal officials and we have yet to hear back. However, court documents state that the government is seeking costs from Brunning because of allegations she made against Canada and federal lawyers. Now, we know that Faye came under fire back in January for comments that she made alleging the court was biased in favor of Canada over residential school survivors. The judge, Justice Paul Perel, did not take too kindly to those comments and issued a ruling back in January, a pretty scathing ruling stating that Faye Brunning slandered the court and that she acted unprofessionally.
Lucy, I understand there was a new development on Monday. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So, Brunning's lawyer, Lawrence Greenspan, filed a motion in court asking Judge Paul Perel to recuse himself from the case because of those comments that he made in that report back in January. Lawrence Greenspan says that the judge himself could be biased against Faye Brunning. It's also worth noting, Dennis, that this is not the first allegation against Brunning for defamation. An Ontario law firm called Walbridge has alleged that Brunning made defamatory comments and how the firm's lawyers handled a residential school survivors case, and that case is still tied up in the courts as well, Dennis.
Lucy, appreciate you taking some time to bring us up to speed on this.
A $5 million prize. That's what the Mohawk community of Akwesasne has its eye on, as they have been named one of 5 finalists in Infrastructure Canada's Smart Cities Challenge. Danielle Rochette has more.
The Mohawk Council of Akwesasne worked hard on their proposal to the Smart Cities Challenge. As one of the finalists, the council will receive a grant of $250,000 to further develop their ideas. Grand Chief Abraham Benedict is excited by the opportunity to address one of the community priorities.
We know that there is a demographic in the community that's very tech savvy, and diabetes affects all ages of our community. So by modernizing our approaches, using modern day technology, development of apps will absolutely serve a demographic that may not be being served right now.
The rate of diabetes in Akwesasne is 3 to 5 times higher than the national Canadian average of 9%. For the 12,000 members, this rate goes up to 30%. Akwesasne Director of Health says new approaches must be developed in diabetes prevention.
Diabetes has a lot of activities that have been carried on. If you go through the literature, it all talks about the levels of diabetes. But there's not that much that's really focusing on diabetes prevention and approaches.
Information Manager Rhonda Adams is very involved in the project's use of technology.
One of the ways that we're looking into that is using technology and innovation in order to help the community manage their diabetes or manage their health levels and hopefully decrease our diagnoses with diabetes within the Akwesasne community.
For the Executive Director, Jordan Wapas, this is a challenge, a competition, and there are rules to follow in order to win.
With that frame of mind, we thought this has to be replicable, it has to be adaptable in other communities, not just Indigenous communities, communities across the country. So we thought if we use an integrated web platform that also includes smart green technology, we thought that is something that would be replicable throughout the country.
Infrastructure Canada will announce the winner of the final $5 million prize in spring 2019. Danielle Rochette, APTN National News, Akwesasne.
It's being called a crisis situation. More than 700 dogs stranded in communities evacuated by wildfires.
That story and more are still to come, but first here's a look at the rest of Friday's weather forecast.
.22 in Fort McMurray and high level, where rain is expected on Friday. Plenty of sun and warm temps in southern Alberta. 27 in Edmonton and Lethbridge. Rain for some parts of the west coast, including Vancouver, with a high of 17. 12 in Prince Rupert and Smithers, where rain is expected. A wet day in much of the Yukon, 15 in Beaver Creek, 16 in Mayo. In the NWT, 22 for Fort Liard. Rain, and 23 in Fort Resolution. 0 for Sax Harbor and Paulatuk, 6 in Inuvik. In Nunavut, 5 in Chesterfield, 4 in Whale Cove, 3 in Baker Lake, +1 on Friday in Pangertung and Joe Haven, -1 in Resolute. Welcome back. It's National Indigenous History Month, and the Royal Saskatchewan Museum in Regina screened a film that highlights a dark part of that history. Here's Tamara Pimentel with that story.
Birth of a Family is about the first time that I and my 3 siblings were all in the same place together. First time in our lives.
The story of how Betty Ann Adam united with her siblings follows a dark chapter in Canadian history.
We were all taken in the 60s scoop. I and Esther were taken before Rose and Ben were even born. And so over the years, it took me basically a lifetime to find them all.
A screening of Birth of a Family kicked off a series of events hosted by the Royal Saskatchewan Museum to celebrate National Indigenous History Month.
For the many 60 Scoop children who have not found their way back to their Indigenous roots, I hope that this film will help to, if they want to come home, I hope it'll be the impetus for them to take that step.
In the audience, Megan Curry finds a deep connection to the film. As an infant, she too was taken from her family. Curry was part of Saskatchewan's Adopt Indian and Métis program. It came after the 60s scoop.
During my youth, I was very disconnected from my culture and was always looking for who I was, and I didn't have a sense of identity.
Curry is Dene from English River First Nation. She says she's never seen her home community and hasn't met much of her family. But much like Adam's story, that's about to change.
I actually have made connections with some of my family there and plan to make my very first trip there this summer and to go home. I met a Dene elder last week and she told me it's your time. It's your time to go.
That's what Curry says Indigenous History Month is all about.
A time to celebrate the beauty of our culture. I think there's time also to take pause and recognize injustices that our people have faced.
I was raised in a white family, and so for a long time I grew up not knowing what it meant to be Indigenous. And so in National Indigenous Month and Day mean a lot to me. They mean a time of celebration and a time of embracing my identity and my history.
Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Regina.
It's a crisis situation to a Northern Manitoba Animal Rescue Agency. They say more than 700 dogs are stranded in 2 First Nation communities that were evacuated weeks ago due to wildfires. Norway House Animal Rescue has written Indigenous Services Canada to plead for help to get volunteers into Little Grand Rapids and Pungassi. The organization says the dogs there are in dire need of food and veterinary treatment. They say pictures of starving pets that have been shared online are extremely stressful to owners who are in Winnipeg watching their pets slowly die. More than 1,300 evacuees from Little Grand and Pungassi First Nations have been staying in Winnipeg hotels for nearly 3 weeks now.
Poor little puppies that are up there. We did just recently hear from the Red Cross, and they say they are trying to arrange flights up to the north, but that they have no agreement in place with the federal government that includes pets. So hopefully they'll get some help here in the coming days as soon as possible.
Team Puppy. Come on, Team Puppy.
Who isn't?
Right?
That's all the time we have for tonight. I'm Dennis Ward.
And I'm Melissa Ridgen. Thank you so much for watching.